house in Baltimore, Luke Jones and I can get together and praise the Baltimore Orioles, but today shall be that day. The Texas Rangers are in town, and Luke, first off, welcome in. I know it's always fun to be at Camden Yards when you go into the locker room afterward, and Buck managed to crack half a smile these days. But, this was what we were expecting back in April, I guess, from a healthier Chris Tillman. It wasn't a complete game. It wasn't 120 pitches. It wasn't a warhorse effort. But he gave the team more than a chance to win. And for that, he gets plaudits by Gary Thorne and Mike Bordick as a great start. It wasn't a great start. It was a great start by Oriole standards, and, I'll take it.
It was a solid outing. I don't know if you would characterize it as anything more than that. If you watch Chris Tillman pitch, certainly only gave up 2 hits, only gave up 1 run. That is really, really good compared to what we've been seeing here, not just from him, but the entire starting rotation. So a good effort from him. I think the one thing, if you look at him, first of all, he had the long layoff. Became a father for the first time earlier this month, and of course didn't pitch before the All-Star break. So, last time he had pitched was June 30th. So, Buck Showalter was interested to kind of see what he was going to get out of Tillman. But if you look back at his last 2 or 3 starts before the long layoff, the one thing that you can kind of point to, and it's not to say that all the results were great. We know that Chris Tillman hasn't been Chris Tillman really all year, hasn't even been close to that. But fastball usage is up a little bit, and that was something that he was really shying away from earlier in the season, and I think a lot of it had to do with he wasn't commanding it and wasn't having a whole lot of confidence in it. And I asked him about that on Monday night after the game, and he acknowledged that falling behind in counts, he was kind of cheating, so to speak, trying to get back into counts, throwing off-speed stuff, and just wasn't working for him. So fastball usage has been up a little bit. Velocity's been a little bit better than it generally was over the first month and a half he was pitching. And he got some results on Monday night. It wasn't great. He walked 4, which certainly 4 walks in 6 innings isn't anything to write home about. But it wasn't a whole lot of loud contact from the Rangers. And I think, you're happy to see that with Chris Tillman. What it means for him, I don't know. He's got to build on it. And what it means for him as far as becoming a free agent, and I wouldn't think he's going to have any trade value here over the last, 12, 13 days.
Well, by the way, as I sat there and watched him work into the 4th inning, into the 5th inning, and, he walked some guys, whatever, I thought, man, dude's pitching for his life right now. He thought this would be the year that he'd be staring at the 4-year, $64 million offer. That's not coming right now, right?
No. To me, even if he pitches well the rest of the way, I think best case scenario, Chris Tillman's looking at a 1 or 2 year contract, and certainly not looking at any substantial money. It's probably going to be kind of that 1 year show me deal, and whether that's with the Orioles or another team remains to be seen. But when you're talking about a guy who gives up 1 run over 6 innings to lower his ERA to 7.2.
I was going to say, it's the first time in a long time he's actually lowered his ERA, right? And when your ERA is 7.5, it shouldn't be that hard to lower it, right? And that's been the ongoing thing, I guess, that if we were really being mean with the team over the last month, guys are taking ERAs with 6 and 6.5 and going out there and raising it. It's incredible.
It really has been. And maybe what's more incredible is the Cincinnati Reds have been worse with their starting rotation.
I don't watch the Cincinnati Reds. Do they still play?
But it's difficult to imagine someone out there being a little bit worse than the Orioles have been. But Tillman, his last start, what was that, against Tampa Bay in late June, he was okay. Only lasted 5 innings, but gave up 2 runs. So, if you say this is back-to-back acceptable outings, I guess you could say that. But this is a critical juncture for him. You're talking about a pitcher who's 29 years old. He's trying to reestablish any semblance of value. When you're talking about coming into this one with an ERA hovering around 8, it's incredible, especially when you consider how good this guy had been for the most part since 2012. So, a 1 year deal. Maybe if he gets on a roll here over the final 2 months, maybe he would get a 2 year deal out of some team, whether it's the Orioles or whoever else. But yeah, it's very clear. A year or 2 ago, this guy's probably thinking, having designs of having getting an $80-90 million contract, something like that. And clearly that's not happening. But for him personally, a nice step on Monday night. And for the Orioles, well, they can't lose all of them. They get a pretty decent start for a change and got just enough offense late in the game.
He is Luke Jones. He is at Oriole Park all week long and ironing all of his light colors and light wear for the long Ravens training camp that begins at the end of next week. Meanwhile, the Rangers are here in town. You know, you and I haven't talked about the Rangers. I've talked to some folks down there in Dallas. Had Goose Goslin on and Evan Grant. You can check that stuff out in the Buy a Toyota Audio Vault. You know, this is a team here that really believes they are a buyer over the next 2 weeks, and they've been as strong as any team after trading deadlines and at the trading deadlines. And, you know, as much as we talk about who is Dan Duquette and what is he going to do, and, you know, he didn't want to be here, and Angelos made him stay, and now we're at this tender point, and I'm following the WNST tech service like everyone else, Luke. Like, you know, Zach Britton might get traded at 3:14 this afternoon. He might not get traded at all, right? I mean, you hear these Cubs rumors and all this, but they have John Daniels, right? And this is the difference between, and I guess around here, no matter how you feel about Ozzie Newsome, you never doubt that he sort of kind of knows what he's doing. I mean, even if he's had some mistakes and this and that, I would say with John Daniels, he's starting to develop that kind of a reputation as a guy you want dealing for your team. And this is a team here that losing a game at Camden Yards and getting the bat shoved up their backside by Tillman kind of hurts them.
Yeah, I mean, they're one of those teams that are just like what we were talking about with the Orioles, say, 2.5, 3 weeks ago. I mean, they're hovering around 500, couple games below. You know, they've scored runs this year. I mean, that hasn't been an issue, but they're pitching. You know, they've been very mediocre in that regard. So, you know, we know that the division's completely out of question for them. I mean, they're, 16.5 games out, but
to their rival, by the way, their new rival, the rival they never knew they had. It'd be like the Browns starting to kick our ass after a while, right? It wouldn't feel good.
Yeah, that would have to be awkward, uncomfortable, you know, however you want to describe it if you're a Rangers fan.
That day when you and I have to go into Cleveland in December and the Ravens are 3-9 and the Browns are, 8-4, that wouldn't be good.
I can't even imagine what that would be like. But it's clearly a team that, you know, there's an offense in place there. I mean, certainly they have a couple pitching pieces, and, you know, even Andrew Kashner, who we saw on Monday night, has pitched well for them. Hasn't gotten a lot of run support, but he has a 3.5 ERA. But
they have a Cole Hamels, and we don't, right? I mean, there was a time when we believed Tillman might be a Cole Hamels. Certainly Bundy in April sort of led us to believe, but having a Cole Hamels makes a hell of a difference.
Yeah, and, you know, Cole Hamels is interesting at this point. I mean, he's 33 years old. He has a good ERA, but he's only made 9 starts this year. Strikeout rate is down. Certainly you wonder if you kind of can call him an ace anymore because of some of those factors. But what do the Rangers do here? I mean, if they just stand pat, I don't know if I like their chances that much more than anyone else that's in that muddied wild card picture. But last year, certainly that's fresh in their mind, what they were able to do, a team that won a lot of close games. But they're one of those teams that, okay, what are you going to do to enhance your ball club? You're going to go out and get another pitcher? Could they go out and get another bat? Doesn't seem like they necessarily need that desperately, but they're one of those teams like Seattle, like Minnesota, like Kansas City, like the teams in the East, not named the Red Sox. Even though look at the Rays, they're right on the heels of the Red Sox at this point. But all those different teams, it really becomes in this market that you have so many buyers and not necessarily a ton of sellers. Who's able to make a deal, and who's willing to pull the trigger and make a deal, understanding that you're playing for a wild card spot in a 1-game playoff. I mean, that's it's tricky in that regard, but I think the Rangers are a team that wants to be buyers, but they need to play well here over the next 11, 12 days, and certainly going into Camden Yards on Monday night and losing the opener against a team that was just horrendous over the weekend. I'm guessing that's something that doesn't sit well for them, but very clearly, I like that offense. They've been one of the best offenses in the American League, but you do wonder, the pitching not quite up to snuff compared to, I think, what they were hoping to have.
Luke Jones joining us here. You can, of course, follow him, Baltimore Luke, out on Twitter, as well as Luke at WNST.net. Orioles entertaining the Rangers this week. The torrently hot Astros come to town this weekend. And, as much as the announcement by Dan Duquette via Ken Rosenthal in the media on Sunday that, everyone's on the market except Machado and Jones, when do you expect dominoes start to fall? I mean, do you really believe the Orioles would make a deal today, tomorrow? I don't, by the way. I think they're sort of in it all the way to the end. But we are getting up on this now. I mean, deals are being made, as we saw with Quintana here Sunday, as well as the Nationals on Sunday making their deals. I start to feel like every day where there's going to be a deal or some heavy, heavy rumors of a deal. The first rumors are Britton and the Cubs, right?
Yeah, and John Heyman talked a few days ago about Zach Britton and the Dodgers. So, we've heard some rumors here and there. I think this to me really comes down to how it typically does in that deadline spur action. Deadlines, we just saw this in the NFL with the franchise tag, even though it resulted in deals not getting done, but that it spurns activity. And I think in the case of the Orioles, I wouldn't be stunned if they make a deal here in the next couple of days, but I'm with you. I'm more inclined to think it's going to be closer to the 31st. There's two ways of looking at it. You can have the teams that kind of pounce early and say, okay, well, that's, in the case of the Cubs, just assuming they're not going to get another starting pitcher, and who knows? I mean, maybe they could before it's all said and done. You kind of say, okay, well, if they pounce early, that's one less potential buyer for a team that's selling. But on the flip side, there's more urgency as you get closer to that deadline on the 31st. So knowing how the Orioles operate, how they generally do not proceed swiftly, I would certainly say deals are going to be closer to the 31st. And it's not necessarily a bad thing in this case, but certainly I don't expect anything big right now, but it wouldn't be completely out of the realm of possibility. But in the meantime, you want to see those guys perform well. I mean, Seth Smith, it's a home run to dead center. He's someone that I think would have some semblance of interest as far as a team trying to enhance their bench, or perhaps they have someone that they want to pair for an outfield platoon. So good to see him hit a home run. Brad Brock picks up another save. So, Wellington Castillo, you want to see those guys play well. It isn't just Zach Britton. It isn't just, Manny Machado, whether or not they're truly listening on anything with him. But it's all those players that have expiring contracts. So, in the meantime, I'm guessing you don't want to see the Orioles run off 6 or 7 straight wins and suddenly they change their mind. And I'm not saying I think that will happen, but some of those guys that are potentially pieces that you might be able to fetch, a mid-level prospect for, a C-plus kind of guy for, you'd like to see some of those guys perform well, and the Orioles saw that on Monday night.
He is Luke Jones. He is Luke at WNST.net and awaiting Ravens activities. And by the way, Monday was kind of a wacky NFL day, right, with the Cousins thing and the Gettleman thing. And, and look, the Cowboys have this kid running the football who can't keep himself out of trouble. And that's not a good place to be when you're 15 months into the league playing in Dallas and think you're a star.
Well, and that's nothing new for the Cowboys. I mean, you think about some of the characters they had. And look, I'm not trying to belittle anything that Ezekiel Elliott may or may not have done. But, the Gettleman thing, just unreal. I mean, this is, 3 or 4 general managers now who have been fired.
Out of season.
We had the situation in Washington at the start of free agency. Kansas City lets go of their general manager. I mean, these are teams, some of these teams that have been playoff teams. We're not talking about the Browns firing their general manager in July. This is a team that's a year removed from a Super Bowl in Carolina. So just bizarre to see that, but nothing takes the cake quite like Allen putting out the statement on his franchise quarterback. Just came across
it's
as
disgraceful. I mean, it's who's advising these people? The president?
Well, it's unfathomable. Well, It's not unbelievable because it's the Redskins. They've done this stuff for years. I mean, as much as we've talked about the Orioles, I mean, it's kind of an interesting pairing as far as PR nightmares. But, I mean, first of all, the deal that they offered, that they put out there, was not an impressive one. If you really, anyone who crunches the numbers and looked at what the franchise tag was this year and what the transition tag is next year, I don't want to say lowballed them, but they certainly didn't give them their best offer. They certainly didn't give market value as far as what the next franchise quarterback in line to get paid would get under normal circumstances. And then they're basically expressing their disenchantment because Kirk Cousins didn't get back to them. Well, he was kind of, when there's a non-response, that's typically saying what? Really? That's your best offer?
He didn't get the email.
Yeah. So, I mean, the whole thing, it's incredible to do that with any player, let alone a guy that...
who's been the only quarterback Daniel Snyder's ever had who's been any good.
Other than one
Mark
year
Brunell.
of RG3 before they let his knee get shredded up. But it's just incredible to think that you would do that with your quarterback of all people. And look, I don't know how great Kirk Cousins is. I know he's good enough that he's a guy that you're interested in going down the road with, as opposed to a guy that you look at and say, well, who's our next quarterback going to be? But to me, the writing's on the wall. I mean, I would think he's gone. I don't think there's any interest on his part to be there anymore.
I feel like the Orioles holding a press conference said, we offered Manny Machado $15 million a year for the next 10 years. He didn't take it.
Yeah, I mean, it's just crazy to think that you would put numbers out there and respond. And then I love the little throwaway statement at the end. Yes, we still hope to work out a long-term contract in the future. It's like, oh, really? I mean, it reminds me of someone who goes on a rant about an ex-boyfriend or girlfriend and tears them down and says everything they did and everything they didn't do, and then says at the very end, "Oh yeah, I still want to be friends." I mean, that last line of that statement just made me laugh out loud. So
there is NFL news in the middle of July. Who knew, right? We thought everybody was still on vacation for another week, right?
I know, right. But just seeing what Carolina did with Gettleman. And look, I mean, Gettleman had plenty of enemies. I mean, Steve Smith put out a tweet right away, and that wasn't surprising. I mean, I was waiting for that. I even had his Twitter page pulled up waiting for him to respond. But he wasn't alone, by the way. There were a few other former Carolina players who mentioned not shedding any tears over his firing. But I'll say this much. Look, we've talked a lot over the last 2 to 3 years over the Ravens. Some missteps, some bad contracts, not drafting up to the same level that they've been so wildly successful with over 2 decades in Baltimore. But you see some of this lack of stability, some of these moves, some of the timing of these moves, and it does make you appreciate much more the stability that the Ravens have. Now, that's not going to last forever, and if they go 4-12 this year, that stability may come to a screeching halt. But it does make you appreciate that because they've had their moments. Certainly, I mean, the Ray Rice thing wasn't something that they caused, but certainly not something that they handled well over the course of a few months. But as far as just the stability and having Ozzie Newsome in place and having other members of the front office in place and having John Harbaugh here, who's approaching a decade in Baltimore, after Brian Billick spent nearly a decade in Baltimore, you can really appreciate that kind of stability when you see some of the craziness that this NFL offseason has been. And, regardless of whether the Ravens paid Joe Flacco too much or how much whether you like his contract or not, or any of those factors, and we've talked at length about that, and we'll continue to talk about that most likely. You've never seen them put out a statement, formal statement, saying that Joe Flacco didn't respond to them, or Joe Linta's selfish, things like anything like that. Just crazy to think that you would put those numbers out there and air that dirty laundry with your franchise quarterback of all people, or I guess
especially for fans. And look, I'm writing the Peter principles. Peter Angelos did this kind of crap once a week in the 90s for years and years and years.
Yeah.
I mean, he pissed all over Mike Messina in the Sun, went on BAL to piss all over Mike Messina, and then Messina went and signed with the Yankees. And we were all, like, shocked. We're all pissed at Messina. We're booing Messina and booing Teixeira for not coming here to play. I mean, the Redskins fans, can you imagine? I mean, my friend Michelle Bresnick-Walsh, who's one of my wife's coaches and a bone marrow transplant survivor, she's a Redskin and Oriole fan. You know what I mean? Like, that's the daily double, right? I mean, right? If that's really your two teams of significance, it sucks for you, man. I mean, you have had nothing normal for 20 years.
Yeah, well, I mean, the Orioles have given a nice, and the funny thing is,
but it's not normal. You know, like,
it's not
I
normal.
cannot normalize the fact that I don't have a press pass isn't normal. The fact that they don't take questions isn't normal. The fact that they fight with everybody isn't normal. But you know, now Peter's about to run the show the next 2 weeks. It's going to be really interesting to see over the next 18 months where this thing goes because, you know, the Orioles have had the shades pulled down on the warehouse for 25 years now. So, I mean, the Redskins are just a little bit more flippant about it. And, hey, the Redskins have won some games during Snyder's regime, you know, and I've had friends that have said I'm never going back once they started charging for practices in Richmond, Virginia. I'm never going back. And then RG3 comes, and they all put their, you know, politically incorrect, swine outfits on and run down there. And, you know, today is a day where if you're a Redskins fan, it kind of feels like it's going to feel around here when Machado leaves and we get nothing for him, you know. You're going to say, I can't believe that they behave in this fashion, you know, that they think this is good business.
Yeah, I mean, it's just, you know, it's something that you just scratch your head about. You know, it's something that, you know, as a fan, I mean, it's leisure activity. I mean, there are teams that, I mean, it's either that or maybe you follow politics or you get into movies more or whatever. So, I mean, I understand it to a degree, but, you know, you just see it and you just scratch your head. And, I mean, I just don't
no one
understand.
can blame Kirk Cousins if he goes out this year and somehow, I don't want to say wins 11 games because I don't think they're a very good football team, but if he goes out and gets himself paid and goes out and gets rich with Houston or Cleveland or whoever it'll be in the offseason, you know, I don't know that a Redskin fan could look at this and not have at least a little bit of sympathy for his side of this because all he's done is gone out and played football, literally, and been a pretty good citizen, right?
Yeah, and I think any intelligent fan in those kind of situations, and it's just like, I remember being 17 years old when Mike Messina left the Orioles, and I didn't hold any ill will towards him. I followed it. I understood it. I booed him because he was a Yankee, you know, and you know, just as a baseball fan. But you know, I didn't dislike Mike Messina. I had no animosity toward him in that regard. So you know, I think in the case of, you know, if you're a Washington fan and, you know, Kirk Cousins leaves and becomes the quarterback in San Francisco, as a lot of people seem to think that could end up happening, of course, with the Shanahan connection. You know, I think Washington fans would be mad because they lose a quality quarterback, but I think anyone who's paying attention and not just the ones showing up on Sunday, tailgating, drinking beer, and watching football for 60 minutes, I think those people get it. They understand, and it's just it's got to be a very incredibly frustrating feeling and where Kirk Cousins ranks, who knows? I mean, I don't think he's a top 5 quarterback or anything crazy like that, but seems to be a guy that you can win with if you've got a decent supporting cast.
I put him sort of in an Alex Smith range where he's going to be you know, he's never going to be Aaron Rodgers or even Joe Flacco or Matt Ryan for that matter, but he's certainly a guy that he's a starting quarterback in the league, and if he's your starting quarterback, why behave in that fashion as an organization? It's disgraceful.
Yeah, I mean, I just I don't get it, and the idea that, you know, you're going to try to lowball someone. I've talked about this with you for years now. There's always that line of demarcation where you say, okay, is this a franchise quarterback or not? And when I say a franchise quarterback, I mean a long-term quarterback. You know, not talking about a guy on his rookie deal or someone you pick up off a free agency for a year or two or something like that. But you know, to me, he's established himself that he's a franchise guy. Now, can he win a Super Bowl one day? Well, he's got to go do it. You know, that's the question for anyone before they win a Super Bowl. But he looks like someone who can be a quality quarterback in this league and has been a quality quarterback in this league the last year or two. You know, certainly a lesser supporting cast on the offensive side of the ball than what he's had the last couple of years, so that'll be interesting to see. But if he's a franchise quarterback, if he's someone that you think you can win with, you got to pay him. And that's just the way it works. And it has nothing to do really even with, vastly trying to overpay someone or, when you get to free agency and when you're talking about signing veteran players, really in any sport, overpaying is part of the deal. That's just the way
people here
works.
are still, scorned by Joe Flacco, and this isn't really all that dissimilar from the Flacco thing, where instead of taking the money, Cousins is like, nah, I'll go get $80 million next year. I'll play it out. I'll take my chances. You have to admire guys that do that. That's certainly what Manny Machado has done, because I'm sure the Orioles have offered him $100 million or something like that would have quote unquote changed his life, and his agent says, no, we're going to get $300 million, and I'm sure that's where it is with Scope right now. Where is that number for someone that makes them comfortable enough to take the money or go bet on themselves and say, I'll go make more money later,
Yeah, and it's something, especially in a sport like football, there is some trepidation because if he goes out and tears his ACL in week 3, then, well, not to say that he won't have suitors, but certainly not going to be necessarily talking about the same amount of money, I wouldn't think. But who knows? Maybe not. There are a lot of teams desperate for quarterbacks out there, so maybe I'm talking out of turn in saying that. But certainly there's a risk, and maybe even more so than getting hurt because the Redskins no longer have Deshaun Jackson and Pierre Garçon is in San Francisco. Maybe he goes out and lays an egg of a season, and maybe Washington lowballing him, they prove to be not right, because I don't think that's how you handle a starting quarterback ever. But, if there is some hesitation as far as just how good he is, because he had a really good supporting cast around him, if he goes out and has a mediocre season, then maybe that, I don't want to say validates, because you still can't handle things the way that they did specifically on Monday and how they've handled it really over the last calendar year. But just fascinating to see. And it just makes me say, man, I'm glad I'm not a Washington fan watching how that's played out, because it's just been utterly ridiculous.
The waiting is the hardest part. We got football next week, baseball this week. Luke Jones will be on the scene with all things Rangers and Astros this weekend. Of course, the Peter Principles are coming next week in their entirety here to WNST.net, as well as our Buy a Toyota audio vault that's there for you all the time, anytime, for anything you want to listen to. Nasty at WNST.net finds me, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Snapchat, Instagram, streaming live on our Facebook as well as our YouTube WNSTV channel. Any breaking news out of the Orioles or the Ravens, you're getting that first on the WNST Tech Service. That's all brought to you by Coons Ford of Security Boulevard. Dennis Colatzos will be here on Thursday driving you home from 3 until 5 with the SSV on WNST. Morning newspaper ships at 7 a.m. to your email inbox. That's all brought to you by Planet Fitness and PlanetFitness.com. It is always $10 a month to get in the best shape of your life there. I'm going to be scouting London for our September trip this week. You can follow along on social media. He is Luke. I am Nestor. We are WNST.net AM 1570 and WNST Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore sports.